The first thing Marin Voss noticed was the silence. Mining stations were never quiet. The Kepler-Briggs extraction platform had 300 workers, 42 active drill columns, and a ventilation system that breathed like a tired animal, a constant low moan that you stopped hearing after your first week and started missing the moment it stopped. When Marin came off her 6-hour survey shift and stepped through the airlock into Processing Corridor B, the silence hit her the way cold water hits a burn. She stood still for 11 seconds. She counted. Then she unclipped the emergency flare from her belt, held it at her side, and walked toward the sound of nothing. She found the crew in the common room, 9 of them, sitting at the long bolted-down tables where they'd eaten 1,000 meals together, argued about card games, taped up photos of kids and dogs and places they'd promised themselves they'd visit someday. They were sitting with their hands in their laps and their faces turned toward the viewport as though watching something lovely outside. The overhead fluorescence flickered in a slow pulse Marin didn't recognize as any fault pattern she'd been trained on. "Hey," she said. Torsten looked at her. He had kind eyes under enormous eyebrows, the kind of man who saved the last of the coffee for whoever needed it most without making a show of it. His eyes were the right color, the right shape, but the thing behind them was somewhere else. "Marin," he said, like her name was a word from a language he was translating. She backed out of the room without turning around. In the 4 months since the Kepler-Briggs platform had locked into its extraction orbit above KBR-7, they had detected exactly nothing unusual. The planetoid was airless, tidally locked, rich in rare earth silicates, and about as exciting as a flat tire. Marin had been hired because she was thorough, and because she had 18 years of geological survey experience, and because, as her supervisor had put it during the hearing interview, she was the kind of person who noticed things. She had thought at the time that this was a compliment. The seed ship had entered the station through Coolant Junction 7 Alpha sometime in the previous 8 hours. They figured this out later from the logs. At the time, all Marin knew was that something had come in through the pipes. She found it in the maintenance crawlspace above the hydroponics bay. It was smaller than she expected. The size of a large dog, curled against the bulkhead in the mineral dark, its exterior a rough mottled gray that looked more like ablative rock than anything biological. It had no visible eyes, no visible anything. It could have been a piece of the station that had shaken loose and wedged itself into the crawlspace, except that it was breathing a barely visible expansion and contraction, like a lung in the chest of something very old and very patient. Marin stayed very still. She had a geology hammer in her tool kit. She had the flare. She had the kind of stillness that comes not from calm but from having decided, in a quiet and absolute way, that you are not going to die in a crawlspace. The thing in the dark shifted. The mottled exterior cracked along invisible seams, and pieces of it, the gray, rocky outer layer, began to fall away in slow, deliberate sheets, the way a chrysalis falls from a moth that has been waiting long enough. What emerged was wet and translucent and pulsing with something that was not quite bioluminescence and not quite electricity. It was, she would write in her report later, beautiful in the way that very dangerous things sometimes are. It turned what she now understood to be its face toward her. She felt the first touch of the signal like a hand pressed flat against her skull. Not painful, the opposite. A warmth that moved inward, a loosening, the specific sensation of a muscle you didn't know you were holding letting go. She felt her grip on the geology hammer soften, felt the very reasonable thought arrive quiet and patient as the thing itself, that this was fine, that nothing bad was happening, that all she needed to do was set the hammer down and come a little closer. Her left hand seized up. Not from fear, from the scar tissue. 7 years ago, Marin had been the only survivor of the Halcyon 9 tunnel collapse. She'd spent 11 days in a pocket of void 3 meters wide, rationing her oxygen, eating the energy gel from her suit's emergency kit 1 small squeeze per hour, talking to herself in a low, steady voice about everything she could remember, the periodic table, the names of every teacher she'd ever had, the words to songs her mother used to sing while cooking on Sunday mornings. A rescue drill had finally reached her on the 12th day. By then, she'd suffered significant nerve damage to her left hand from the cold and the compression, and the rebuilt tendons and the neural grafts that had replaced them were a dense tangle of biological and synthetic tissue that her doctors had described, with clinical politeness, as a complicated interface. The alien signal was biological in origin. It propagated through organic neural tissue. The synthetic grafts in Marin's left hand received it and immediately translated it into something the grafts understood, which was electrical noise. Her hand cramped, the warmth in her skull stuttered. And in that stutter, that half-second gap between one pulse and the next, Marin Voss swung the geology hammer. She didn't hit it. She hit the bulkhead beside it deliberately, and the clang was enormous in the small space. The thing recoiled. The signal cut out entirely. Marin scrambled backward through the crawlspace on her elbows and knees, moving fast and ugly, not caring what she scraped, came through the access hatch at the far end and dropped 6 feet to the hydroponics floor and was running before she landed. She ran to the station's secure data room and locked herself in and sat on the floor for a while. Then she started going through the logs. KBR-7 was not the first extraction site. There had been a survey team here 11 months prior, a smaller crew, 4 people, sent to assess the planetoid for extraction potential. Their final 3 weeks of logs were not in any archive Marin had been given access to, but she found them cached in the station's base data core under a routine systems flag, buried the way things get buried when someone is trying to file them quickly and quietly and not draw attention. She read for 2 hours. The survey team's lead geologist had been a woman named Petra Andreescu. Marin did not know her, but she recognized her. The way Petra wrote, methodical, precise, then increasingly frantic, then methodical again in the way that only people who are very frightened go methodical, because order is the only thing they have left, was familiar the way a mirror is familiar. Petra had documented everything. The arrival, the shedding, the signal, the way it moved through her crewmates like a tide coming in, slow at first, then irreversible. How they'd stopped arguing and started agreeing about everything, with a soft and constant pleasantness that was more disturbing than conflict would have been. How Petra had watched them and felt the pull of it herself. She wrote about that without flinching, the wanting to give in, and how she'd stayed out of reach anyway, by sheer stubbornness, by leaving the room every time she felt it starting, by working with her hands until the feeling passed. She had tried everything she could identify to kill it. She had failed. Her last entry was 2 sentences. I have found something in the signal. I don't have time to test it. If anyone reads this, it's afraid of its own frequency. There was no entry after that. Marin set the tablet down. She picked it up again. She read the last 2 sentences 4 more times. It's afraid of its own frequency. She thought about what she knew. The signal was biological. It moved through organic tissue. Her synthetic grafts had scrambled it. She thought about what a scrambled biological signal looked like to the organism producing it. And she thought about feedback, about the acoustic feedback from a speaker placed too close to a microphone. That shrieking loop of signal reflected back amplified. And she thought about what that might feel like if you were the microphone. She thought about Petra Andreescu, who had died trying to figure out what Marin was now going to try to do. "Okay," she said, to no one, in the quiet data room, and the words sounded like the kind of thing you say before you do something that is either very brave or very stupid, with no way of knowing which until after. She spent the next 3 hours in the station's electrical engineering bay, which she had precisely 0 training for. Working from schematics, she pulled off the maintenance database and intuition she had developed from a career of understanding how things fit together underground. She rerouted the station's broadband neural interface, the system designed to let crew members sync with survey equipment using basic neural commands, into a feedback amplifier. The interface was designed to receive and interpret biological neural signals. Marin rebuilt it to do the opposite, to take an incoming signal, mirror it, amplify it, and blast it back at the source. She used the synthetic grafts in her left hand as the receiver node, because they were already proven to interact with the alien signal without being subsumed by it. She taped the rig to her forearm with 6 strips of electrical tape, and a prayer she wasn't religious enough to fully commit to. She went back to the hydroponics bay. She found more of the crew there now, 13 of them, sitting among the hydroponic rows in the pale grow light, arranged around something she couldn't see. They were murmuring to each other with a low, steady, cooperative warmth. They sounded like people at a party who all like each other very much. Torsten was there, and Chief Engineer Priya Sood, and the twins from geological drilling who finished each other's sentences even before whatever was happening to them, and all of them looked at Marin with the same expression. A gentle, concerned welcome, the way you look at someone who is having an unreasonable reaction to something you've already decided is fine. Marin, Priya's voice, careful and soft, you should come sit with us. In a minute, Marin said. She pushed through them. They didn't grab her. They moved aside with a kind of cooperative courtesy, making space, the way a crowd parts around someone moving with obvious purpose. She reached the center of the ring and found the creature there, fully emerged now, the rocky shell entirely shed, its wet translucent body arranged in what she could only describe as a posture of ease, sprawled and patient and entirely comfortable, the way something sits when it has never had reason to fear anything. It turned its face toward her, and the signal began. The warmth in her skull, the loosening, the very reasonable thought that this was fine. The graphs in her left hand went haywire. Marin activated the amplifier. The creature made a sound she had no word for. Not a scream, it had no throat for screaming. It was the sound of a frequency colliding with its own reflection, and the effect was instantaneous and total. The creature contracted, curling inward the way burning paper curls, and the signal coming from it spiked and then collapsed and then spiked again in a chaotic loop that had no coherent pattern left in it. Marin held the amplifier steady and took 3 steps toward it and held her left arm out, and the reflected signal hammered back into the creature at point-blank range. Around her, she heard the crew begin to blink. Torsten said very quietly, "What the hell?" Priya said, "Oh God," in the voice of someone who is remembering something terrible they were not fully conscious of experiencing. The creature made the sound again, weaker now. Its bioluminescent pulse, that not-quite light, was stuttering. Marin thought of Petra Andreescu. She thought of 11 days in a pocket of void 3 meters wide, counting, rationing, staying alive on patience and the sound of her own voice. She thought about the fact that out here, in the dark and the silence and the cold, the only things that kept you alive were the things you'd built and the people beside you, and that something had walked into this station and tried to take the people beside her. She held the amplifier steady until the creature stopped making the sound. Then she held it steady a while longer. When it was done, she sat down on the hydroponics floor among the tomato planters and put her back against a grow light column and watched the crew come back to themselves. It was not a clean process. There was a lot of crying. There was vomiting. Torsten, who never talked about how he was feeling, talked about it for an hour and a half without stopping. Chief Engineer Priya Sood sat very still for a long time and then said, with extreme calm, "I'm going to need you to explain exactly what happened while I was gone," and listened to the answer with her hands folded and her jaw set and her eyes very bright. Marin explained it twice. She showed them the rig on her arm. She showed them Petra Andreescu's logs. She showed them the body of the creature, which had lost all coherence and was resolving into something that looked increasingly like mineral sediment, like it was returning, structurally, to the material it had disguised itself as. "How did you know it would work?" Priya asked. "I didn't," Marin said. Priya looked at her for a long moment. "The hand," she said. The hand, Marin agreed. Priya looked at the rig, and at the graphs visible beneath it. The pale seam of synthetic tissue running from Marin's wrist to her second knuckle. 11 days, she said quietly. She'd heard the Halcyon 9 story. Everyone on long-haul survey contracts had. 11 days, Marin said. They found the seed ship breaching coolant junction 7 Alpha and sealed it. They found the frequencies from Petra Andreescu's notes and Marin's working rig, and they spent the next 14 hours encoding them into the station's emergency broadcast system. The distress beacon that was designed to punch through interference, to cut across distances, to reach anything in range with a signal strong enough to be impossible to ignore. They broadcast the frequency on every band the station had. They broadcast it outward and outward, into the dark between the stars, in the direction the thing had come from. Marin stood at the viewport while the broadcast ran. The planetoid KBR-7 turned slowly below her, gray and patient, and absolutely indifferent to everything that had just happened on the platform above it. The stars beyond it were very still. She thought about the last entry in Petra Andreescu's logs. If anyone reads this, the specific hope of someone who knew they were running out of time but still chose to leave something behind anyway. The deeply, stubbornly human impulse to document, to communicate, to say I was here and I learned this, and I want it to be useful even if I don't survive to see it used. Torsten appeared beside her with 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one without saying anything. She took it without saying anything. They stood at the viewport together for a while, watching the dark. "Is it over?" he asked eventually. Marin thought about the vast implied patience of a species that sent its seeds out in meteors, that moved at the speed of geology, that had been seeding planets and stations and civilizations for longer than humanity had been writing things down. "No," she said. He nodded, "But we know how to fight back now." "Yes," she said, "we know that." The broadcast kept running. The signal moved outward at the speed of light, which is the fastest thing there is and also, in the face of certain distances, still very slow. But it was moving. It was saying something. It was saying, "We found you, we understood you, we took you apart. We are the species that does not simply accept what reaches us from the dark." In the direction the thing had come from, which was also the direction of a great many other things, the signal traveled. Marin drank her coffee. The stars did not move. But somewhere, she was certain, something heard.